Autonomy. It's everywhere, isn't it? This modern mantra. We celebrate independence, self-reliance, being the captain of our own ship. But here's a question that's been sort of nagging at me. Could our relentless pursuit of autonomy, actually be steering us wrong sometimes? Could too much of it maybe lead to feeling isolated or, I don't know, lost at sea?
Yeah, that's precisely the paradox, isn't it? The really intriguing thing we're unpacking today. We often just assume, right, that more autonomy automatically means more well-being. But the sources we looked at explored this fascinating idea, this autonomy trap, where striving for total self-sufficiency can, ironically, just lead to feeling dissatisfied, maybe even overwhelmed by it all.
Exactly. And the material, well, it really digs into how our modern expectations are a huge part of this. We're constantly told we can and should be doing it all ourselves, independently. So our mission in this deep dive is to get past that surface level praise.
Yeah.
We want to figure out when autonomy genuinely helps us, when it might be tripping us up, and maybe chart a course toward a more thoughtful, a more reflective kind of independence.
Okay, so let's dive into that, this modern obsession. It really does feel like we're living under this constant pressure, doesn't it, to be these self-contained units. I mean, think about it. You're expected to be your own life coach, your own financial planner.
Your own therapist.
Right. Your own therapist. You've got to be an independent thinker, emotionally bulletproof, build your own brand.
It's relentless. And when we inevitably stumble, when we don't quite hit those, superhuman standards, the knee-jerk reaction seems to be just clamming up, trying even harder on our own. It's like retreating into this fortress of, I'll handle it.
Precisely. And when our actual life doesn't match those, highly curated online versions of success and happiness, disappointment sinks in. We start wondering, why aren't my relationships this easy? Why isn't my growth this straightforward line upwards like I see on my feed? And that's where this pursuit of autonomy can shift. It stops being a value we consciously pick and becomes more like a shield. That's reactive autonomy as opposed to a more considered, reflective approach.
Reactive autonomy. Okay, that's a key difference. It's not a thoughtful choice. It's more like a reflex action, protecting ourselves from disappointment. And this brings us to how autonomy fits into a bigger picture of values, right? It's not always the number one thing.
Exactly. Think about it like tiers. Tier 1, the foundation. Fundamental values like integrity, maybe objective truth, justice. Then tier 2 could be those ethical relational values, empathy, responsibility, harmony. Autonomy, maybe along with personal growth or open-mindedness, sits more in that third tier. Now, this doesn't mean autonomy isn't important, far from it. But it does suggest that we need to apply it thoughtfully, especially if it bumps up against those higher order values.
So it's about being strategic, not just defaulting to autonomy if it means, say, compromising integrity or neglecting responsibilities to others.
Right. And let's circle back to those expectations, the sky-high expectations. It's not just careers, is it? It bleeds into everything. Self-improvement isn't just a hobby. It feels like a full-time job. Relationships are meant to be these perfectly balanced things, constant growth, mutual support.
And social media just pours fuel on that fire. Even a normal life can suddenly feel lacking. It's like we're always comparing our messy reality to everyone else's polished highlight reel. And these expectations, they often come from online, not even our real communities.
Exactly. And when our real-world experiences, inevitably fall short of those digital ideals, that's where trust starts to wear thin. We feel let down by partners, friends, maybe even ourselves for not achieving that perfect, effortless state. This can really breed distrust, not just in others, but even in our own ability to, navigate things and connect properly.
Okay, so I see the chain. Unmet expectations lead to disappointment. Disappointment erodes trust. And then lack of trust makes us want to pull back and just rely on ourselves. Autonomy becomes the wall.
Precisely. Independence shifts, doesn't it? From a useful skill to more of an emotional defense. People might become more self-reliant, sure, but also more isolated. They miss out on that interdependence, the shared stuff that's actually vital for well-being.
And this retreat just feeds into that individualistic mindset that's already so strong, especially in Western societies. We love the lone hero story. Needing help can feel like failure.
Absolutely. It lines up perfectly with these societal narratives that push personal responsibility above almost everything else. So you get this loop, right? High expectations, unmet expectations, trust erodes a retreat into autonomy, reinforces individualism, and guess what? The personal expectations climb even higher.
Wow, yeah, that's a tough cycle to break. And what's the emotional cost? all this pressure and isolation?
Oh, it takes a significant toll. We see loneliness increasing as social ties weaken. Burnout is rampant because people are trying to juggle everything alone. Cynicism about relationships, about institutions, it just grows. And there can be this deep sense of shame when we internalize those perceived failures as being just our fault. It makes forming healthy, compassionate connections with others and ourselves really, really difficult.
And it feels like our modern world is almost engineered to keep this cycle going. Social media, like we said, it's just a constant stream of perfection.
Totally. Social media is a huge amplifier. It
Yeah.
shows us these curated realities that mess with our perception of what's normal or even possible. Then you add the market-driven push for self-optimization, personal branding,
Right.
even the self-help world, which has good intentions and useful tools, can sometimes accidentally make us feel inadequate. Like we're always just a few steps away from being our best self.
Okay, so we've definitely painted a picture of the potential dark side here, the unchecked autonomy. But let's be fair, autonomy itself isn't bad, right?
Yeah.
What are the actual upsides?
Oh, absolutely. Healthy autonomy is crucial. I mean, it empowers us. It lets us make choices that align with our values, our needs. It builds resilience, that sense of agency. I can handle this. It lets us navigate challenges, take ownership. It provides necessary boundaries, too, protecting us from harm or being taken advantage of. It fuels creativity, lets us explore. And it's absolutely essential for personal growth and figuring out who we are.
Those are all vital things. But you stress the dangers of unchecked autonomy. What does that actually look like day to day?
Well, in its extreme form, it can mean real isolation, deep loneliness because we push people away. It can breed this pervasive distrust, cynicism, making connection feel almost impossible or dangerous. Emotionally, maybe detachment, vulnerability starts to feel like a massive weakness. And that constant pressure doing everything yourself, that leads straight to overwhelm, burnout. And maybe the most concerning thing is, pursuing our own goals so fiercely, we might develop blind spots. We might miss the needs of others or shared ethical concerns.
Which brings us back nicely to this idea of reflective autonomy, a more balanced way to do independence, not ditching it, but being more intentional, discerning.
Precisely. Reactive autonomy is like the default setting is no help needed, ever. Reflective autonomy is about pausing, assessing the situation. Okay, when do I need to stand on my own, and when is it okay, or even better, to lean on others? And this way of thinking has real benefits. Better decisions, maybe, because you're not wasting energy trying to control everything. Stronger relationships, because you're actually making space for collaboration and trust when it's appropriate. And it can genuinely reduce anxiety because you're not carrying the sole weight of the world all the time.
It sounds like it demands more self-awareness, too. Like consciously choosing when to be autonomous forces you to look at why.
Exactly. And it allows for more balanced power dynamics. You can choose to let someone else take the lead sometimes without feeling like you're losing yourself entirely. Plus, when you're not constantly guarding your independence, you actually free up mental space for curiosity, for new things.
But as you pointed out, even this reflective path isn't, like, perfect. It has its own challenges, doesn't it?
No, definitely not a magic bullet. One potential issue is what you might call ambiguity fatigue. Constantly weighing these choices, assert or yield, can be tiring. There's also a risk, maybe, that if you often choose collaboration in smaller things, others might misunderstand your intentions. And for people who've really used autonomy as a shield, choosing vulnerability, even reflectively, can feel pretty uncomfortable at first. Plus, let's be real, in fast-moving situations, you might not always have the luxury of time for deep reflection.
So it's really about shifting how we see autonomy. Not as this fixed part of our identity, I'm an independent person, period, but more like a tool. Something in our toolkit we can choose to use when it makes sense.
Exactly. It's about having agency over your agency. That's where those reflective questions come in handy. Asking yourself, okay, are my core values really on the line here? Is this decision fundamentally about who I am, or is it something where I could comfortably trust someone else's input? Is this urge for control coming from like a place of strength and clarity, or is it maybe fear or insecurity? And crucially, what could I actually gain here by choosing trust or collaboration instead?
That brings up another important point you made, the difference between autonomy and authenticity. They sound similar, but they're not the same thing.
That's right. Autonomy at its heart is about control. I choose, I decide, I'm in charge. Authenticity is more about truth, showing up as you really are, flaws and all. And that often requires vulnerability, interdependence. In fact, sometimes being too focused on autonomy can get in the way of authenticity. We might hold back from showing our needs, asking for help, or truly connecting because we're scared of looking dependent or losing that control.
It feels like there's this constant tightrope walk, doesn't it? Between needing our independence and wanting connection, wanting trust. And modern culture often seems to push us towards playing it safe with more autonomy, maybe because we're scared of getting hurt.
Precisely. That fear, potential disappointment, betrayal can make us overvalue autonomy like it's a safety net. But like we've been saying, real connection needs some vulnerability. And that means interdependence, being willing to give up absolute control sometimes. You see it in close relationships, right? Sometimes that fear of losing independence can actually stop people from fully committing, from really sharing their lives deeply.
And this tension just gets amplified online, doesn't it? We have so much autonomy, so many choices, who to follow, what to read, who to date. But it almost feels like the sheer volume of choice is overwhelming. It can paradoxically make us less satisfied.
Absolutely. We're told we can curate this perfect online life, connect with anyone, access infinite info, but it creates this huge pressure. Decision fatigue sets in. That fear of missing out, FOMO, on the better option, the optimal choice. It can be paralyzing. Suddenly, being the CEO of your own digital life, it doesn't feel freeing. It feels like a massive burden. Think about online dating, for example. Yeah, it gives you incredible autonomy in picking partners, but some research suggests it might actually decrease overall satisfaction. Maybe because we're always wondering if someone better is just one swipe away.
You also brought up a really deep point, how this strong drive for autonomy can sometimes come from past hurts, like a trauma response.
Yes, that's a really crucial layer. For someone who's experienced, say, significant betrayal or maybe grew up in a very controlling environment, an overdeveloped need for autonomy in adulthood can be a way to feel safe. It's like saying, I won't let myself be that vulnerable again. But it's so important to look underneath that. Ask, am I choosing this independence from a place of strength? Or is it a defense mechanism rooted in old pain?
And we have to remember the cultural lens, too, right? How we see autonomy is heavily shaped by where we grew up. What's praised in the West might not be viewed the same way elsewhere.
Exactly. That strong emphasis on individualism, self-reliance, particularly in American culture, it's not universal. In many other cultures, group harmony, family ties, collective identity, those often come first. So if you're interacting across cultures, really pushing hard for your individual autonomy might come across negatively, maybe selfish or disrespectful. Reflective autonomy encourages being mindful of that, adapting your approach.
Okay, so let's make this really practical. How does reflective autonomy actually look in everyday life? Can you give us some concrete examples?
Sure. Okay. Friendships. Maybe after a disagreement, instead of just pulling away, that's reactive. Reflective autonomy might mean pausing, thinking about the value of the friendship, and choosing to actually talk it through openly and honestly. Parenting. It's about consciously giving kids age-appropriate choices and responsibilities to build their independence, not just saying you want them to be independent while, micromanaging everything they do.
Right, fostering it rather than just demanding it.
Exactly. Or in romantic relationships. Instead of resisting interdependence because you're scared of losing you, it's about figuring out together how to make space for both individual needs and shared life within that intimacy.
Those are great interpersonal examples. What about more internally, like at work or with our own well-being?
Okay, work. Feeling swamped by a project. Instead of just isolating yourself and trying to muscle through, reflective autonomy would mean assessing, hey, could collaborating actually make this better, faster, less stressful? Or facing burnout. Someone practicing reflective autonomy might realize asking for help isn't weakness, it's actually a smart, proactive move for self-preservation. Even creatively, you get feedback you don't like. Is the resistance really about protecting your unique vision? Or is it maybe ego, a fear of being influenced? Reflective autonomy helps tease that apart.
You also put together some really sharp questions to help us gauge, when to lean in or when to maybe yield a bit. What are some of those prompts?
Yeah, these are designed to just create that crucial pause. So you ask yourself things like, okay, what's the real cost of holding on to absolute control right here, right now? Or is this a moment where my leadership is essential? Or would listening and bringing in other views actually lead to something better? Another big one. Am I holding on to my autonomy here to protect a core value? Or am I mostly just trying to avoid feeling uncomfortable or vulnerable? And maybe the most revealing, what could actually open up if I chose to trust here instead of defaulting to I'll do it myself? And finally, is this situation genuinely threatening my sense of self, or am I just stepping into unfamiliar territory?
I really like that shift in seeing autonomy not just as this fixed virtue we either have or don't, but as a skill. something we can actually get better at,
Yeah.
apply strategically.
Exactly. And like any skill, it takes self-awareness, it takes practice, and knowing how to adapt. It's about knowing when to assert, when to step back, and really understanding why you're making that choice. That's what makes it a powerful, adaptable tool, not just a rigid ideal.
You also went deeper into some of the psychological reasons behind our drive for autonomy, like it being a coping mechanism sometimes.
Yes, and that's a really important layer. Often, a very strong preference for independence can be traced back to earlier experiences, trauma, maybe neglect, or consistently unmet needs. If you grew up in a really unpredictable home, for instance, needing a lot of control as an adult might be how you try to create safety. Or if you've been badly betrayed in relationships, you might become very reluctant to rely on anyone ever again. It's vital to look under the hood. Is this autonomy coming from strength, or is it protecting me from potential pain?
And you mentioned the complex dance between autonomy and vulnerability. They can feel like opposites.
They often do feel like opposites, yeah. But healthy autonomy actually provides the secure base for vulnerability. It's the difference between saying, I choose to be in this connection because it adds to my life, versus feeling trapped, like I have to stay. Unhealthy autonomy builds these high walls, terrified that any reliance means losing yourself. But the best connections allow for both a strong sense of self and the willingness to be open, to depend on each other appropriately.
That whole myth of the self-made person ties into this too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Our culture loves that story, but it's often misleading.
Oh, absolutely misleading. We celebrate the story of the individual who does it all alone. But that narrative conveniently ignores support systems, privilege, mentors, resources, even just good luck. This hyper-individualistic ideal pressures people to hide their struggles, hide their dependencies. It sets this unrealistic and frankly isolating standard.
And our digital lives add another layer of complexity to autonomy.
For sure. We have amazing control over our online image, the info we get, the connections we make. But sometimes that curated digital self is more performance than real expression. We get this illusion of infinite choice, but often we're just picking from what the algorithm feeds us, right? True autonomy online means being aware of that, consciously trying to align our digital choices with our actual values, not just going with the flow.
And finally, you brought in the spiritual angle, which is fascinating. Autonomy viewed differently.
Yeah, from that perspective, maybe the highest autonomy isn't about clinging to ego, controlling every little thing. Maybe it's about the freedom to let go, to forgive, to act from compassion without needing applause or feeling like you have to dominate. Sometimes the most powerful autonomous act is actually surrendering that need for control, trusting something larger.
You also came up with a great visual, the autonomy spectrum, showing it's not just on or off.
Exactly. It's a continuum. And where we land on it can change depending on the situation. You might be pretty passive in a low-stakes context, more reflective in a tricky relationship. Maybe you're reactive when you feel threatened, or even over-controlled if something triggers old trust issues. Reflective autonomy sits in that balanced middle ground. It's characterized by that deliberate pause before acting.
And you pulled these different threads together in that table, looking at autonomy psychologically, relationally, culturally, digitally, spiritually. It really drives home how complex this is.
Yeah, I'm trying to synthesize it. So psychologically, you see autonomy as a coping mechanism, like overworking to avoid asking for help. Relationally, it might mask a fear of intimacy, needing tons of space and conflict, and maybe never really coming back fully. Culturally, how society markets autonomy as self-worth, like those idealized independent influencers. Digitally, that difference between curated freedom and real inner agency. And spiritually, how sometimes the deepest autonomy is about surrender, like choosing to forgive.
You also mentioned how the pressure to create that perfect online identity can actually make autonomy itself a source of anxiety.
Absolutely. When our online self becomes this constant performance, always having to make autonomous choices about every little detail, opinions, aesthetics, it can be incredibly stressful. This pressure to always be original, always consistent, it can ironically kill spontaneity and genuine expression.
And that paradox of control, trying to control everything, often leads to more chaos. That's a key insight.
It really is. Trying to suppress emotions, micromanage relationships, rigidly plan the future. That excessive need for autonomy often backfires. It creates more instability, more disappointment. Sometimes real autonomy lies in having the wisdom to let go of control, embrace a bit of uncertainty, allow for the unexpected.
And framing reflective autonomy as part of emotional intelligence really clicks.
Yes, because it involves self-awareness, why do I want control? Self-regulation, pausing before reacting. Empathy, considering others. social skills, collaborating well. And motivation, what am I really aiming for here? Seeing it that way helps us view autonomy not just as a trait, but as a relational skill we can actually develop.
And you suggest thinking of autonomy less like a solid wall separating us and more like an ongoing dialogue.
Exactly, a constant back and forth between my needs and others' needs, between my past and my future hopes, between wanting certainty and being curious, between needing control and being willing to trust or surrender sometimes. That perspective makes our approach to autonomy way more fluid, more responsive to life's messiness.
Lastly, you gave us that wonderful metaphor, the reflective autonomy compass. North, east, south, west, assert, engage, yield, withdraw. Can you walk us through that quickly?
Sure. It's just a tool to help navigate those choice points. North, assert, is when you need to stand firm, protect core values, boundaries. East, engage, is about actively seeking out and learning from others. Curiosity over certainty. South, yield, is for those lower stakes moments where softening control can build trust. Control versus trust. And West, withdraw, reminds us sometimes we need to step back for our own well-being, set those necessary boundaries. Boundaries versus avoidance. Each direction involves navigating a tension. Asserting might balance identity versus integrity. Yielding balances control versus trust. It helps guide that reflection.
So it really feels like the highest form of autonomy isn't about being totally separate, is it? It's more about finding freedom within relationships, connecting authentically without feeling forced, and being okay with solitude without being afraid.
Precisely. When we consciously move towards reflective autonomy, we're not weakening our independence. We're actually making it smarter, more effective,
Right.
more human, really.
It's a powerful shift, moving from autonomy as just an isolating shield to seeing it as a tool for attunement, a skillful way to respond to all the complexity life throws at us. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the final thought you want to leave everyone mulling over?
I'd just encourage you in your own life, maybe in the decisions or relationships you're navigating right now, to ask, is this a moment where asserting my independence is truly what's needed? Or would listening, maybe yielding a bit, lead somewhere better? Is this boundary I'm drawing about genuine self-respect, or is it maybe rooted in a fear of getting close? Is this choice really about freedom, or is it perhaps a reaction to something from the past? And maybe the biggest question, how can you move towards more alignment, more connection, instead of just rigidly clinging to autonomy no matter what?